Good morning and welcome to another podcast of Iconic Freedom, The Formula. We are talking about setting standards for accountability and responsibility in this journey of personal development. Let each care for self and all will be cared for. So good morning and welcome to another podcast here at Iconic Freedom, The Formula. We are talking about personal development and accountability and responsibility in your life, taking ownership of your choices. So I hope you had an opportunity to listen to some of Kyle Seraphin's interview with Mikki Willis and the filmmaker of the Plandemic Series. I found it pretty interesting, but so I wanted to break down a couple of things that he talked about on that podcast, and one of them was one of the very first clips that I'm going to show here is that he talks about life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. So I'm just going to push back on that a little bit, and especially again, if you've been listening to this podcast, you know that my thought process is more that life doesn't happen to you, it happens because of you. And why does it happen because of you? It happens because of the choices that you make. Now, later on, he does talk about, taking ownership, accountability of your life, and you'll hear that clip as well, and we'll touch on it. But I think this is a really important piece to the fundamentals of life. At least in my observation, and hopefully you're observing it as well. If you're not taking ownership of the choices that you make, then you're always going to see yourself as a victim. And if you always see yourself as a victim, what happens to your life as you filter the world through that lens? That you're always seeing that people are doing things to you and it's unfair. People are unkind, they're rude, maybe they are rude, but when I look at people, I just think, well, that's just who you are. And I tweeted something earlier this week about, somebody said something about, would you hang out with these people? And I said, no, I don't judge them, but I definitely will avoid them. And, I've kind of made that my own mantra for myself. Now, I've talked about before setting your own standard, your own internal authority, and then letting that guide you for the quality that you want to choose throughout your life. I choose not to judge people in that sense that, you could do whatever you want, just don't harm other people. That would be, my standard is, not harm others. I wouldn't harm myself, I wouldn't harm others, I just wouldn't do it. But to look at the world as though everything's happening to you just keeps victimizing you. The epiphany for me happened in my own life when I took accountability, when I took ownership of my choices and started being responsible and realizing if you make the choice, you have to fix it. And I just had a situation at work where, one of my staff, failed to do something and she had to take ownership of that and she had to fix it. She had to find a way to engage with the people that it impacted so that, if there was anything she needed to do to rectify and correct it, then she needed to do that. And, she did. I mean, to her credit, she's a young person. I don't know. I think she's probably in her 20s, mid to late 20s. And, it's a very mature thing to be able to do that. Now, there's one thing to, F up something, right? But that doesn't mean you are effed up. It just means your actions were. And so that's fine because you can correct that. You can fix those kinds of things. When people are damaged deep within, then that's a whole different ballgame. And, that's where this whole aspect of being damaged within to the point that you avoid personal accountability and responsibility, and thereby you think the life is happening to you, and thereby you are seeing the world as unfair, and then you are always a victim.
All of it was divine. I have a rule in life, the old cliche that life doesn't happen to you, it happens for you. And so I look at all of that as my training ground so that I can understand what I understand today. I had to go to the other side of the spectrum. Well, it's all a primer for the mass hypnosis that so many people are stuck in right now. We don't realize to the degree that advertising, the damage that it's done to our collective psyche, because it's just there all the time. It's everywhere we go. It's on those little dividers at the checkout stand. It's everywhere that there's a blank space. They fill it with advertising. And so even when we're not looking at it, we're seeing it. And that's something that people don't realize, that there's so many subliminal things happening, that our mind is always being bombarded with what they want us to see and think. And that can affect even the strongest willed people.
So the next piece that he talks about is, that you heard in that clip, is about basically the distractions. And we've talked about that before, touched on it, that you're being distracted by things in order to find ways of manipulating and controlling. And again, if you're a person that is being accountable and you're taking ownership of your choices, then you take ownership of the choice not to be influenced by certain things. That when you hear something, it's not enough just to hear it. You also want to do a little bit of research. You want to find out about it. You just don't want to take somebody's word for it. Everything that I'm saying, I mean, all these podcasts that you've been listening to, don't take my word for it. Put it to the test. See for yourself. Be a scientist in that sense. Use that scientific method. Prove it out to see if it's true. If I take ownership of all my choices, does my life change? And if it does, then you've proved it out. And if it doesn't, well, then you can look to see, okay, then Greg's full of it and I won't listen to that anymore. Or did I miss something along the way? Did I miss a piece of this understanding and I need to go back and revisit it? But he talks about the manipulation of media and marketing and all that other shenanigans, and how much that influences us in our world.
Well, I can tell you how I help my children make the highest choices in a world that's constantly tempting them away from their highest choices. And that is, first and foremost, I teach them through what they want and not through what I want or what their mother wants for them. That's a very important thing and a mistake that most parents make, where it's, I need you to do this. I want your room to be more clean. I want you to, and the kids have values. They have goals. They have wants and desires. And you have to understand, I took the long route on most things. I don't regret that. And so in that understanding that, I also don't want to rob you of your experience and your right to fail, because it's important. It teaches us character and grit. So I don't want to insulate you from learning the do's and don'ts of life, but I'm going to offer you each way a clear directive that lets you know, this is the short path directly to what you want, and this is the long path. Choose. It's up to you. That's your life. That's your life experience that you get to choose. And I'll be here for you no matter what path you choose. But understand, there's a choice. There's always a choice. And so, and then it's also understanding that the mind.
So that clip right there, I wanted to have as part of this podcast because I think it's germane to what we're talking about, because we are talking about having access to information from a young age to be able to help develop us. This is all about your personal self-development, right? So if you'd had these tools in a younger part of your life, perhaps your life would be different, right? I mean, you may have made different choices. And what's kind of interesting about this is that he talks about the aspect of his kids and how he interacts with them and how he wants to not impose his will on them, but encourage them to explore themselves. Oftentimes, and I think I've talked about this previously, but one of the things that I've talked about is that, parents will want to basically impose all of their points of view on their children and never give them an opportunity to think for themselves or to guide from their own internal authority and then to figure it out. And that was the other piece that he talked about, that Mikki was talking about, was that he presents them with options and said, but you choose because you always have a choice. One of the things that we say here is, don't confuse a difficult choice with no choice at all. You always have a choice. And I think it's a brilliant statement from my perspective to make, especially, and if you're a new mom or a new dad, you're a parent and you've been thinking about this. It's a great thing to be able to allow your child the freedom and the liberty to figure it out. Of course, you're not going to let them harm themselves, right? We don't want to do that. But to allow them the chance and the opportunity to kind of figure it out, so that when they're saying, I don't want to play with Bobby over there, it's like, okay, so what is it that makes you not want to do that? And it's not that you're trying to correct their behavior, you're trying to help them figure out what internally in them is telling them to move away from that individual. And what is that about? That's teaching them internal authority, for them to pay attention to internal authority. Too often, people want to impose, whatever brainwashing they've had growing up about, well, you're not supposed to do that, you don't judge people, blah, blah, blah. But then you tell them to deny who they are, deny their own instincts, their own thought process, their own internal authority. And when they do that, what does that cause them? What has it caused people? If you listen to that entire interview, you heard at one point where Mikki was talking about his brother who had HIV, and this was back in the 80s, and his mom ignoring her own internal authority and allowing medication. At the time it was the AZT, I think it was, that was harming people that had HIV, and to the point where her son died. And eventually it took her own life, mainly because the cancer that she had at one point wound up coming back. And am I making a connection to that? I absolutely am, because those kinds of choices that you make in your life, it is a holistic approach to the life. It isn't just one thing or another. And the devastation that she felt from having made a choice to ignore her own internal authority and to go with the stupidity of people like Dr. Fauci, it truly made a difference, and it took her son's life.
But because we become so conditioned to follow the leader and have realized that when we follow a leader that we can also escape responsibility. That's what it is. People don't want to be responsible. They don't want to go, I actually caused this. That divorce was my fault. Oops, my kids are messed up, and it's probably because I didn't really even look into the school I enrolled them in. I didn't meet with the teacher. It was the closest school. It was 2 miles away, so I said yes. They don't want to understand, like, the choices that you made out of your addiction to comfort and convenience is probably why those elements of your life are not working. And so there are a lot of people that just want to be told what to do, because they don't want to be responsible for their choices. And then they can just blame it on it. Oh, it's Biden's fault. Oh, it's Trump's fault. It's whatever. It's like, yeah, okay. But every time we do that, we're giving our power to those people and to others. We're giving our power away. The moment we say, how did I create this? I may not been the one that facilitated it, but I somehow participated in this. And this is the moment for us to wake up, particularly as men, to just really own our behavior of the last several decades.
I think is a relevant experience for most people recently, trying to comply their way out of it. Maybe we can touch on just your historical analysis from looking back, it's particularly with this perspective. Have people always been willing to surrender agency in order to reduce their responsibility? Do you think is that a human condition? Is that an American condition? Is that a recent phenomenon? Where does that fit, do you think?
Well, I've only been here 50 years. I would say in my experience of this life, it's always been the way it is that people have been led for generations into believing that there are others that are more suited in leading their personal lives. And if we just elect the right person, everything's going to change. Never has, never will. Can improvements take place? Absolutely. And I think there's some improvements that are about to take place in 2024. It's going to get a heck of a lot worse before it gets better, but I'm very optimistic about what's coming. But is that the end all? No. We'll be right back in this position in a few years if we don't wake up and take responsibility for how we got here. And but there's a reason I called my latest movie The Great Awakening, because I believe that that's what we're...
So having watched that clip, to be honest, there's really nothing I can add to that. I think it's brilliantly stated. You've heard it a bazillion times on this podcast that it's all about taking ownership of your life and stop blaming people for the choices that you've made and the conditions in which you're now existing. So this next clip is a little bit longer, but the thing that I really liked about it is that it talks about his own epiphany and how he came to discover for himself and allow, I like making the analogy, allow the matrix to open up to you so that you see the reality, that you take the red pill and that you're no longer going to allow yourself to be bamboozled in a sense, in that you start taking ownership of your life and you start wanting to be accountable and you start moving down this path. And it's interesting how life then starts to open up to you and the realities open up to you. If you've ever seen the movie or the series The Matrix, it's a remarkable thing. It's an interesting type of series where it really talks about being open to what's actually going on and not trying to be distracted, like we talked about earlier in the podcast, to things that you just don't want to face. It's just easier to face things and manage them, correct the action that you need to take in order to move your life in a different direction, and then to enjoy your life. I don't know if Neo actually enjoyed his life, ultimately, I suppose. But it was just interesting that once he decided to take that red pill, once he was willing to step through and into the matrix, he was able to see the reality for what it was. And there's something very powerful about that. And I really enjoyed this piece of it, especially when, it's talking about politically, because, the media lies. They lie and they lie again and they lie even more. And all because they want to manipulate and control. That's what lying is all about, to manipulate and control. Well, do you want to fall prey to that? Or do you want to be open to the fact that, I don't necessarily trust what you're saying right now. I think I need to fact check you, as the term might be, and see what the true reality is. But the only way you can do that is you have to open your mind to the idea that what you're watching, what you're seeing, what you're hearing may not be accurate or may not be true. Just like I said earlier in the podcast, don't just believe everything that I say. Take it, with a grain of salt, in a sense, to, okay, well, how about, what if I go ahead and try this out? What if I try this formula out that Greg talks about and see what it does?
What do you think the elements are that showed you that people were asleep, and then and what makes you think that they're waking up, or what will help them wake up if that's the case?
Well, I know because I was asleep. And so I know what it feels like to wake up. And it's been a process since 2016, when I was on the road with Bernie Sanders as a filmmaker, helping to grow his grassroots campaign. that I realized as I started to ask tough questions to this democratic socialist movement that we were encountering at every stop from Los Angeles all the way to Philadelphia, that there were a lot of really good people that were fiercely supporting Bernie, but didn't fully understand what they were supporting. And I was one of them. And I started to ask questions like I have at the beginning of the Great Awakening, when I realized that I asked, groups of young people, what's the difference between socialism and democratic socialism? And they'd have these catchphrases that they throw at, but the more I drilled, I'm a professional interviewer, so I don't just settle for the first answer. Just like you just said, it has to make sense to me. I don't get that. I'm going to ask you again, maybe another way, maybe a deeper question, until I understand what you mean here. And I'm not a big fan of word salads, and so I would ask again. Well, how does that vary from the old socialism? Well, it's socialism, but this is by and for. The reason it didn't work before and it was deadly and horrible was because that was controlled by, oligarchs and all of that. And okay, so how is democratic socialism? What is that? Who controls that? Well, democracy, by and for the people, so the people control it. And I go, oh, okay. And now socialism is about owning the means of production and making sure that there's no one at the bottom, which sounds cool to me. And you're helping, everyone's helping each other, and the uber rich, they get taxed more so that the people at the bottom aren't suffering. There isn't such a gap in classes. Yes, cool. Who collects those taxes? And they would go, I guess that'd be the government. And I'd say, do you trust the government? And of course, everyone, no. And I'd say, and do you approve of the way the government spends your tax money now? No. Do you understand that you're telling me you want to give them more? So you want now all the wealthy people who have innovated and built their businesses very successful, you want to tax them up to, some people are saying 90%. Wow, that's crazy. What do you think that's going to do to them, first of all? Think about that. They don't care because they're the rich. They're the 1%. Well, you should care, because you have to understand most of those people are the ones who provide jobs for the rest of the people. And a lot of those people are actually the innovators who are creating things that actually allow this country to be a leader. And without that innovation, without those creations, then how do we advance as a society? And how do we stay up with, if at the time I was into, alternative energies and all that, how are we going to advance to find better energies than coal and oil, which I completely reversed my awareness of the practicality and importance of oil at this point. But then I was way against it, protesting against pipelines, shutting down banks with Jane Fonda and all of that. And, but I said, you understand, like, this doesn't, and some people would admit it. They go, I haven't really thought about this that deep. I just like Bernie. Okay, cool. That's awesome. And that's when I said, the first question was, are these people hypnotized? Because I don't think they're dumb. A lot of them, I'd say, what's your education? Because I started to realize there's a real correlation between crazy ideas and university. That's when I started going there. Most of the people who have really crazy ideas, they all studied under some Marxist professor. Interesting. And so they believed it because they were bred and parented into obeying authority. And if they have a professor, this guy must be right. That's their teacher. They're paying, $80,000 a year to learn from this person. They can't be wrong, or why would they be paying them? It would make them stupid. And so they end up, not understanding even what they're supporting. So the moment I said, are they hypnotized? Then I realized, well, I'm part of them. And I'm kind of here too, fiercely supporting Bernie and not really understanding what I'm supporting. Am I hypnotized? And the moment I asked that question, it was, like I say in the movie, it was like a faith healing, because I started noticing things that were right in front of me this whole journey, but I couldn't see them. I started realizing, wait a minute, that's a sickle and hammer sticker on your laptop. That's a communist sticker. What's that doing there? Oh, here's a Che Guevara shirt and hat and things on water bottles. And I started realizing I was surrounded by wannabe communists. And I couldn't believe it. And then I started saying, is that, like, are you trying to be edgy, or what is that about? Why are you supporting Lenin? What? you know, what Lenin did, right? Mao Zedong, he killed 80 million people. Why is that a hero? They all had some crazy story of why these people had the right political ideologies, the most deadly dictators of all time. And that's when I went, whoa, wow, I didn't know I was involved in this. And then I withdrew my support online, and and it saw the fragility of that. I call it being bonded by agreement. That's the problem with any relationship that's bonded by agreement, but particularly the relationships that are established on the left. They're all bonds through agreement. Like, you have to check every box. We agree with ideologies. We're not here to celebrate each other and our individuality. We're here as a collective to make sure that we agree with all of it. You can say men can dress in dresses and identify however they want, but the moment you say, I don't think biological men should be competing in combat sports against women, then you're out of the club. That's it. You have to agree, check every box. And I didn't realize that I was, I'd just fallen into being part of that collective. And the moment I came out to say I no longer support this, then I was called a traitor, and I was their number one target for a while. And I was like, interesting how fast you can go from being the poster child and the hero. People are like, thank you so much for all the work you're doing to support Bernie. And I saw the video you made, that was great. And that was wonderful, to suddenly being like, you ever step foot in our neighborhood and you might not make it out, like threats, death threats. I was like, wow, I was in a cult. I didn't even know it.
Well, you used the word, just my words.
Literally their identity. And so we have become obsessed with identity politics. It's all about the people and not the policies. And that's where we make the massive mistakes, and not recognizing, I don't like the way Trump talked, and I don't like the way he was mean, and he did his tweets and whatever. Cool. What's he doing?
Right. How's your 401k look?
Exactly. Do you understand that people have food on their table that didn't have it yesterday? Do you understand that there's a lot happening for minorities and women that have never happened before in this country, that he's undoing a lot of the truly systemic racism that was plaguing this country, like the 3 strikes you're out, prison situation that imprisoned a generation of primarily brown and black men, and with life sentences for some of them having a joint on them, like real harsh things that were being undone. That we have, peace talks with Russia and Korea, and like there's some massive things that were happening.
Yeah, I went swept under.
Yeah, I went from really not liking him to having a conversation. His former wife, Marla Maples, is very dear friend of mine. Mm-hmm. And we had a conversation when Trump was president, and she knew that I wasn't a big fan of him. And she told me, she said, one thing she goes, look, I'm ex-wife, so of course I have my complaints, of course. But I cannot deny that my time with him, what he showed me was that man loves this country. He talked about it all the time. He was so hurt by what was happening to it that he said if he ever has to jump in, he will. He doesn't want to, but he will. And he used all of his power that he's accumulated to do his best to save this country. She goes, that I know is real because I was with him. And I went, really? Wow. I thought he was just super selfish, greedy, real estate mogul guy that was, she's like, no, he's losing a lot of money right now. Business could be a lot easier. And I said, wow, that's good. So thank you for that. Let me start opening my mind and heart to get off of what I just mentioned, get off of the fact that he can, be offensive, and actually learn to love that after a while. I mean, people need to thicken their skin and start saying what they feel again. People are so fragile that of course, if we're going to honor free speech doesn't always feel good, but let somebody speak the way they speak. Are we strong enough? Are we big enough as people to know how to navigate that stuff that we don't like? And could it be valuable for us to endure things? Because when we insulate ourselves from the real world, there's mean people out there, a lot of rude people.
And of course, finally at the end there, when he talks about, everybody having a thicker skin and, being able to, toughen up a little bit, which is the case. We've moved a society to overindulging people in all of their emotions and their feelings instead of ignoring it, because your emotions and feelings are for you. They're an internal guide for you to understand your own internal authority. And as you've listened to this podcast during the year, you're starting to make the connections to all the things that we've been talking about separately as conversation. That what are the emotions, that are going on that you're recognizing for yourself that become indicators to help you understand how you want to respond to something. If you understand your emotions and you're not living in your emotions and you're not, regurgitating them onto an unsuspecting society, but instead use those emotions as indicators to say, okay, something's going on here. I need to pay more attention to what's going on, because life will whisper in your ear, it will tap you on the shoulder, and it will smack you across the face until you figure it out. And as you continue to listen to the podcast, if you go back and listen to it again, if you decide to read the book, the book that I wrote called Iconic Freedom, if you read all of that stuff and you start to make these connections that, these things, much like the human genome, how everything connects together, you watch those videos where you see everything kind of flood together. You start to make all of these connections of understanding, wow, this leads to this, which leads to this, which leads to this. My emotions lead me to indicate things that I need to pay attention to. As a result, I'm not seeking affirmation outside of myself. I'm paying attention to my internals, and I'm letting that be my guide. And in that pathway, I'm also taking ownership of my choices. As I take ownership of my choices, I realize I have to respond to my choices. I'm better prepared to respond to my choices. And as you go through this process, as you go through these steps, as you've walked this path, this journey, even just during this year, you're seeing, if you're taking these things to heart and you're trying them out for yourself, you're seeing the difference that this is making in your own life, and that the changes that are happening. Now, change doesn't happen, like a lightning bolt. It happens in the day-to-day, moment-to-moment choices that you're making. And in the aggregate of your life, at the end of the year, imagine where you can be if you've been able to take this journey for yourself and be on your way.
And we are at the end of another podcast. Thank you so much for joining me. Hit that like button if you would. Share this with your friends and family. You never know what they might get out of this. If you'd like to subscribe, feel free to do so. You can do that on the website, link down below. My email is there, so if you have a situation that you'd like me to cover on the podcast, that would be awesome. I'd be happy to do that. Send me an email.